Do you think there's actually a risk of domestic terrorism overthrowing American republicanism?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think January 6th was a good thing. I think that people should be held accountable. So just, that's my position on that. Do I think that it was, like a big planned professional event? Like, I do not. I think it was a bunch of idiots doing idiot things and
bumbling about. What do they call them? The MAGA Mimas.
Yeah, you look at that group and these people are not. This is not, like James Madison and John Adams. I mean, that's not what you had there.
This wasn't SEAL Team 6 moving in.
I remember those Viking helmets and the face paint,
Yeah. I mean, it's a big deal, and I think it should be taken seriously. But I also don't think, I think that the press, this is where I really get aggravated with the press. We talk a lot about civil war. Right. And I think that these people don't know what civil war is, or they think it won't happen, but they think they can get clicks by talking about it. But, there are going to be idiots that start believing that there's like a real civil war that's forthcoming. And,
why wouldn't there be?
Why wouldn't there be? Yeah. Because I'm not saying it can't happen, because it can happen anywhere. I think that Americans do not really want to shoot their neighbor in the face.
What about the guy in North Dakota who just took an SUV and ran over an 18-year-old?
Oh yeah, no, listen, no, and when you talk about stuff like that, where you have people that have been driven to a point where they truly believe that like someone is the enemy because they're a Republican or a Democrat, like that's a real problem.
And the president did just give a speech where he said that.
Yeah, I thought that was an ill-advised,
But don't you kind of think? For one, I'd say. This is what I was saying about Bill Burr when he said people don't hate each other, it's the internet. I'm like, yeah, why would a neighbor want to shoot their own neighbor?
Yeah.
Well, no, because people who live next to each other tend to share political values. But what about the person who lives in a city talking about somebody who lives in the South or in a rural
necessarily
area?
Like I live in Chapel Hill, which is like the most liberal place on earth, right? Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And like, actually I have a funny story. Like one day I answered the door for the pizza guy and I was wearing like a Second Amendment t-shirt and the dude started crying. He's like, oh my God, like there's another like conservative in this town, I thought that was really funny. My neighbors are great. They're all liberal. They're great people. They're nice people. And so anytime anybody starts talking about civil war, I literally ask them, like, do you actually want to shoot your neighbor in the face?
Well, nobody wants to, but
what are you going to do it for? Like, what's if we have a civil war in America, our life here will never be as good as it is now. Your life will be worse, will absolutely be worse for the rest of your life.
That's true.
There will be like catastrophic. I mean, like people here do not understand.
All right. Let me ask you then.
Yeah.
How many child sex changes would you allow to happen?
Period?
No. Where you live, right? It's very liberal.
Yep.
Let's use Vanderbilt, for example, in Tennessee. Yep. They've been giving children sex change surgery. Mm-hmm. You'd be willing to compromise on that to allow.
No. So I want
got a problem there, don't you?
Well, I want to start by like I am totally supportive of anybody that's trans. Like I am totally fine with an adult, deciding that like this is not who they want to be. I treat anybody with empathy. I will treat anybody with respect. If you were a man and you transitioned to being a woman, like I will call you by your new name. I will always be kind to anybody. And I think it's totally acceptable. I do get nervous, but I am also not an expert in this. I do get nervous anytime you're talking about children, given that, there is a high percentage of folks that begin transitioning and then change their mind.
Desistance, which is, depending on the study, it can be between 65 and like 95%.
So, I think that you just have to be careful.
I made this point to Stephen Marsh. He wrote a book called The Next Civil War. And, he was saying he believes a civil war is coming. He wrote a book about it, but he's more on the liberal side, though he doesn't think he is. He doesn't realize that he is. And we talked about it. He's a cool dude. We just disagree. And, I pointed out to him, I said, do you have universal health care in Canada? He's Canadian. He said, yes. And I said, okay, we don't here. would you give up half of your, how much of your healthcare would you give up to compromise so that we don't go into conflict? And he goes, I wouldn't. And I'm like, you see, there's a problem, don't you? So what we're having now is, sure, you might say, like, why would a neighbor fight a neighbor? Well, they probably wouldn't. I mean, in many civil wars, regular people are trying to flee from the violence. You take a look at Syria, you take a look at the Arab Spring, you take a look at Ukraine. Most people are just leaving, but a lot of people are fighting. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, it's different. That's an invasion that I understand. When you look at Syria, there are people who are choosing to fight and fight for their cause. So the issue I see is, it may be that 90% of people don't want to fight, and that's a good thing because they shouldn't want to fight. Nobody should. Right. But then you come to an impasse. And the impasse right now is stark. Matt Walsh just did this big expose on Vanderbilt University in, I think they're in Nashville, right? The medical center?
Right in Nashville.
And they have videos talking about how much money they're going to make doing sex change operations on children, on actual children. Irreversible damage, irreversible surgeries. And the issue I take with this is not have anything to do with trans people, because I agree with you on that point. People, I think if they're adults, should be free to do with their bodies as they see fit, within certain reason, of course. I mean, we don't want people harming themselves, like committing suicide. And there's questions about body dysmorphia. But the issue here is the scientific studies showing high rates of desistance. And you look at our Scandinavian, more progressive friends over in Europe, and they've shut down this stuff. So now you have the issue of Billboard Chris. Are you familiar with Billboard Chris?
I am not.
He wears a billboard that says children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And when he goes up and he talks about this stuff plainly, calmly, scientific reports, trusting the science, they scream in his face. They threaten him. In some instances, they stalk him. And then we've actually seen what happens when you go against a lot of this ideology. I mean, one kid in North Dakota for being a Republican extremist, apparently, and threatening the guy, so claims the guy, he's dead now. And the guy killed him and fled the scene. So the issue then arises is, in Florida, for instance, Ron DeSantis, and I'm sure many people around him will say, hey, schools shouldn't be giving kids sex ed without parental consent. So what does the media do? Completely lie about everything happening. You've got Boston Children's Hospital and this whole hoax around a bomb threat. The threat was really called in. It was called into the hospital, but the media was reporting that there was an evacuation when there wasn't, and it's a complicated story. And then you have Vanderbilt. With all of these institutions, once they're exposed giving children sex change operations, they delete their websites. And I think it's obvious. They know that the overwhelming majority of American people would reject that and are horrified by the idea that they would do it. And so then you have people saying, look, there are people who believe nothing's going to happen. Meanwhile, the violence has been escalating consistently for several years. You've got Joe Biden coming out on TV only a few weeks ago saying that MAGA Republicans are an extremist threat to this country. 2 weeks later, a guy kills a kid for calling it and calls him a Republican extremist. So you combine these things with outside of my opinion, my opinion is all based on expert testimony. A Princeton professor saying that there's a cold civil war coming. All signs, I should say the history of what we're witnessing today rhymes with what we've seen in, say, Russia, Spain, or Germany. So for people to come out, the way I described it the other day is, when Bill Burr comes out and says neighbors aren't fighting each other, we're sitting atop a watchtower, checking the news, reading the news all day, every day, and we can see pockets of conflict all off in the distance. And then we can literally see the president stand up on a podium and yell, they are the enemy and they're destroying this country. And then we look down on the ground where Bill Burr's having a beer and he goes, nobody's fighting anywhere. There's no civil war over here. You're crazy. So when I hear that kind of stuff, I'm like,
that was a good Bill Burr.
Oh, thank you. But I just, considering we talk about it, I don't think no one here that we've ever had wants a civil war. And so we have people like Michael Malice and even Luke saying national divorce, peaceful divorce, before it gets to that point.